What if an alien enemy arrived that didn't fire lasers or missiles, but used your own voice, your signals, even the hum of your machines, as the weapon that dismantled you from the inside? Humanity's defenses are falling. Every vibration is now a battlefield, and the invaders have given us one command: silence or extinction. But in the quiet, something else begins to grow: determination in a single, impossible idea. What if we change the way we speak and turn communication itself into a weapon? Join us as we explore the moment humanity learns that sometimes the only way to survive is to redefine what it means to have a voice at all. Section 1. The day the signals broke. There are wars you see coming as silhouettes onto the horizon. Fleets on scopes, troop counts, projections. This one began as a glitch in a song. A maintenance tech on a relay station beyond Neptune was streaming an old Earth track. Strings, percussion, vocals buried under the soft hiss of cosmic background. Halfway through the second verse, the music fractured. Notes stretched, folded, and rose into a keening tone that had never been written, too pure to be an error and too precise to be random. Then the glass began to shatter. It started with his mug, a hairline tremor at the rim that spiderwebbed in an instant. The workstation panes followed, blooming into crystalline cracks that raced to the edges. Structural struts, one deck below, groaned in protest. Alarm icons flared as the resonance climbed out of the audible range and into the bones of the station itself. "Control, this is Relay 9, the tech shouted, but the comm channel drowned in the same impossible tone, his words shredded into static ribbons. Across the solar mesh, other anomalies whispered into existence. A survey drone near the Kuiper Belt reported its own engine harmonics being overridden by an external pattern. A mining rig on Ceres watched support beams vibrate themselves to powder. In low Earth orbit, a tourist ring shut down mid-spin as the bearings in its joints screamed, then fused. At first, analysts blamed software faults, sabotage, freak coincidences. But in the Signal Warfare Division aboard the defense vessel TSV Nadir, Commander Aya Rios watched the overlays stack. Different locations, different systems, the same narrow band of frequencies threaded through it all like a signature. She muted the room, let the noise die to a hush. On the main display, traces of the events drew together, forming a single rising line on the spectrum. Steady, unwavering, as if someone far away were humming one continuous note and the universe was reluctantly singing along. "Run cross-correlation with deep space noise," she ordered. The ship's AI complied. Background radiation, pulsars, mesh traffic, all peeled away. The line remained. "Source?" she asked. "Exogenous," the AI replied. "Origin appears to be beyond the heliopause. Pattern consistent with intentional emission." Intentional. Rios felt the words settle in her chest like a stone. Humanity had long expected first contact to arrive as a message in clear code or as a ship burning bright against the dark. No one had planned for an enemy whose first language was resonance itself. On the outer scopes, interference fringes sharpened into structure, standing waves in the vacuum creeping toward Neptune's orbit. No hulls, no drives, just geometry of stress in space-time, moving as if it had intent. In the Nadir war room, someone whispered, "Are those ships?" Rios did not answer. She listened to the faint beat under the tone, a pattern that did not sound curious. It sounded like counting. Please do press that like button if you have enjoyed this story so far. That would mean a lot to me. Now back to the story. Section 2. The Resonants appear. The first time anyone called them the Resonants, it was meant as a placeholder name in a panic briefing. The term stuck because no one had anything better and because language was the only thing humans still owned outright. TSV Nadir rode a slow arc above Neptune's pale limb, its hull wrapped in sensor arrays tuned to every form of whisper the universe knew how to make. Commander Aya Rios floated in the central well of the war room, boots maglocked to the deck, eyes fixed on the main display as the unknown signal grew. "Show me the wave field," she said. The stars vanished. In their place unfolded a false color map of the space beyond the heliopause. It looked wrong immediately. Instead of clean gradients of background noise, Rio saw bands. Sheet after sheet of compressed interference stacked into a pattern that reminded her of standing waves in a lab tank. When you pulse water at just the right frequency and the ripples froze into ridges. Except this tank was billions of kilometers wide. "Those structures are kilometers apart," the analyst murmured. "But there's no mass signature. Nuing reflexion, just stress." The AI added, "Detected phenomena are localized variations in space-time curvature consistent with resonant amplification. They appear to self-sustain." Rios folded her arms. "You're telling me their ships are vibrations?" "Approximation acceptable," the AI replied. One of the bands thickened, its internal pattern tightening like a cord being tuned. A distant patrol drone adjusted course to get a better look, edging closer on a slow spiral. For a brief, hopeful moment, the interference around it eased, as if making room. "Drone 41, maintain distance," Rios ordered. "We don't know what constitutes an attack perimeter yet." The acknowledgement ping came back distorted, as though dragged through water. Then, without warning, the waveband nearest the drone brightened on the display. A narrow spike shot out along one specific frequency, impossibly sharp, a knife of sound in a medium without air. The drone didn't explode. It just unraveled. Hull alloys shifted into dust. Circuit traces delaminate. Fuel cells went grainy and collapsed. In less than a second, Drone 41 became a streak of particulate haze. The wave band narrowed again, as if the act of destruction had been nothing more than a note sung and forgotten. Silence held the war room. "Mark that event," Rios said quietly. Her mouth felt dry. "Whatever they are, they can dismantle matter at a distance by choosing the right harmonic. No heat. No blast." A new pulse rolled across the map, deeper than the rest. The AI translated the pattern into a band of audible sound. It played through the bridge speakers as a layered tone that made teeth ache. Embedded within, modulation traced out a primitive but unmistakable structure, a message. The translation came up in cold text on the side of the display. Silence or extinction. If you have enjoyed this story so far, then please do subscribe and hit the bell icon to listen to more stories like this one. Let's get back to the story now. Section 3. War in Every Vibration. The war did not begin with declarations or salvos. It began with people being told, very calmly, to stop talking. Within 6 hours of the first ultimatum, a system-wide alert went out from the Accord Council. Non-essential broadcasts were to cease. Entertainment feeds cut to black midlaugh. Music channels faded into static. Civilian mesh traffic throttled to a bare trickle of routing instructions. For a civilization that had grown up wrapped in constant signal, the sudden quiet felt obscene. On TSV Nadir, the change was even sharper. Aya Rios watched as status panels dimmed, their colorful overlays replaced with stark monochrome text. Burst transmissions only. Line of sight relays when possible. No more open bands. "This is the opposite of everything we've trained for," her communications chief muttered. "We've spent decades building redundancy and chatter into the net. Now we're supposed to shave it down to whispers. If the air is poison, you hold your breath," Rios said. Same principle. We starved them of clean signal. It almost worked. For a while. The next resonant attack did not ride a music track. It rode thermal jitter. A habitat over Mars reported microscopic fractures in its outer hull, then lost contact. When Nadir reviewed the logs, a horrifying truth emerged. The resonant pattern had slid down the spectrum, abandoning obvious channels. It amplified random vibrations, heat in metal, faint hums of machinery, until those harmless jitters aligned into lethal resonance. Even silence was not truly silent enough. Anywhere atoms wiggle, they can reach us, the chief analyst said, voice thin. Fleets attempted maneuvers by tight beam laser, but the beams themselves carried structured vibration. A patrol group near Saturn watched its calm laser bloom into a shimmering curtain of destructive harmonics, then tear its own sender apart. Orders garbled mid-transit. A simple command to retreat turned, somewhere in the mesh, into a pattern that triggered emergency vent protocols instead. 3 ships died without ever seeing the enemy, suffocated by their own safety systems hijacked through signal. It was war on a front humans had never fortified, against an enemy whose weapons were not projectiles, but possibilities. Rios ordered Nadir's internal audio shut off. Footsteps thudded in heavy silence. Crew members signed or used text, their words stripped of breath. She felt each lost murmur like a minor amputation. What scared her most was not the destruction. It was the ultimatum's accuracy. Silence or extinction. The Resonants were not asking for territory or tribute. They were demanding that an entire species abandon the thing that had made it more than a collection of clever animals. Its ability to send meaning across distance and time. To speak, to sing, to argue. To be human in anything but body. Rios looked at the muted ship and knew the choice was brutal. Fade quietly or fight loud for home. Section 4. The Quiet Engine Proposal. The proposal came in like everything else in this new war, as a pattern that looked wrong at first glance. On the Nadir's secure channel, a burst packet arrived from an Accord Black Lab, listed only as Facility Greyline. No insignia, no origin coordinates, just a checksum and a tag. Quiet Engine, proof of concept. Aya Rios skimmed the abstract and felt her skin prickle. It was not about weapons in any familiar sense. No warheads, no beams. It described a field configuration, a shape in quantum space that, if sustained, would force every mode of vibration within its radius to cancel itself. Not just sound, not just radio. All oscillations above the most basic ground states. Total non-resonance, she murmured. Her tactical officer frowned over her shoulder. Is that even possible? You kill all waves, and you kill half of physics. Not half, Rios said, but enough to make life and machines very uncomfortable. A live feed request blinked. She accepted. Dr. Elias Voren appeared in the hollow well, shoulders stooped, eyes ringed with exhaustion. Behind him, Rios saw the ghostly outline of a toroidal device, caged in support struts and bristling with emitters. Commander Rios, Voren said, thank you for answering on short notice. I understand you've been tracking the resonant incidents since day one. Tracking, losing to surviving, she said. Your file says you have a way to make them stop. Voren hesitated, then nodded once. We believe so. The resonance requires structured waves to exist. Their ships, their weapons, even their communications are harmonics embedded in space-time. No resonance, no resonance. By turning space off, Rios said. Locally, Voren replied. The quiet engine generates a bounded quantum field in which coherent oscillations cannot form. To them, it would be like removing the floor from under a building. Their standing waves collapse. Rios glanced at the specs again. The projected radius was impressive, big enough to envelop an entire battle group, or a city, or a chunk of a planet. And everything inside, she asked. Voren did not look away. No sound, no radio, no laser comms. Neural implants go dark. Complex chemical reactions slow. Brains might continue to function at a reduced capacity, but higher-order processes, the patterns that make thought, depend on oscillation. We don't know where the line is. You're saying this thing might erase minds without leaving a mark. I'm saying, Vorin answered quietly, that if the alternative is the resonance doing it to the entire species, we may not get to choose a clean option. Rios considered the hollow chill that followed his words. A weapon that saved humanity by forcing it into pockets of mute, disconnected survival was not a victory. It was a culling that left the body breathing and cut out the voice. Why send this to me? She asked. Because Vorin said, someone has to decide whether we build more than one. Section 5. Testing the silence. The prototype quiet engine did not look like the end of the world. It looked like an oversized ring thrown around a caged star, suspended in Greyline's primary bay. Segmented coils wrapped its circumference, etched with crystalline lattices that caught the light. Around it, technicians moved with a slow caution reserved for unexploded munitions. Aya Rios stood on the observation gantry with Dr. Vorin at her side, watching power umbilicals snake from the floor into the engine spine. "You've run sims?" she asked. "Thousands," he said. None of them were brave enough to be reality. Below, TSV Nadir docked nose first against the bay's outer ring. 3 escort frigates hung nearby, chosen for hardened systems and volunteer crews. "The plan is simple," Vorin said, as if simplicity could make it less insane. "We tow the engine to the edge of a resonant cluster, activate at minimum radius, observe the collapse. If the field behaves, we scale up. And if it doesn't behave?" Rios asked. "Then we log interesting failure data," he said, "for whoever comes after us. If anyone does." The launch went smoothly. Tethered to Nadir's spine, the quiet engine slid into the dark like an iron halo, its coils and field generators sleeping. The resonant cluster ahead pulsed on sensors, a knot of standing waves crawling toward the inner system. "Engine at test coordinates," Nadir's helm reported. "Resonant structures within projected capture zone." Rios felt the ship's vibrations shift as power rerouted. The usual hum of systems dimmed, like an orchestra holding its breath before a final note. "On my mark," she said. "Greyline, engage primary field at 10%. There was no flash. Indicators simply flipped from green to black as the quiet engine woke. The cluster reacted instantly. Harmonics spiked along its edge, then faltered like a choir losing its pitch. On the display, portions of the wave structure winked out, unable to sustain themselves inside the spreading pocket of imposed stillness. "We're doing it," someone whispered. "We're killing them." Rios almost allowed herself a breath of relief until another alert flared. "Commander," the comms chief said. "Escorts 2, 3, and 4 just went dark. No signal, no internal chatter, nothing." Diagnostics scrolled in silence. Hull integrity nominal. Reactor output stable. Life support running. Yet they hung there without motion, without course correction burns, without the tiny adjustments that marked living crews at work. No pings, no background noise of processors chatting across internal buses. Vorin stared at the quiet engine's readouts. "The field reached farther than projected," he said. "It didn't just cut off the resonance. It may have skimmed the edge of their neural activity patterns. Sanitized them. Are you telling me we just erased their thoughts?" Rios asked. "I'm telling you," he said, "that this is what victory by silence looks like." Section 6. Fractures and Factions. News of the test spread faster than any official channel could contain. You could try to limit bandwidth, throttle broadcasts, enforce silence, but humans had never been good at keeping quiet when something terrible and miraculous happened at once. Within a day, every major node in the Accord knew 2 facts. The quiet engine could erase the resonance, and 3 ships had fallen silent without a single hull breach. In the orbital hall above Earth, the Council convened under a dim dome. The stars overhead were alive, unperturbed, peaceful, but the feeds lining the chamber walls told the truth. Wreckage from earlier resonant strikes spun in frozen arcs. Statistical models sketched trajectories of extinction in smooth, uncaring curves. "We finally have a decisive weapon," argued High Marshal Gorin of the Inner Defense. "Deploy engines at scale. Lace the system with overlapping fields. Yes, we lose regions to silence. Better islands of survivors than none at all." Across the hall, Director Sana of the Belt rose, jaw clenched. "Islands of survivors who can't even speak to each other," she said. "We are not trading one death for a slower, quieter one. You turn those fields on around our habitats, you turn them into coffins with lights." Gorin jabbed a finger at the casualty graphs. "The Resonants won't give us time to debate philosophy. They're dismantling us bit by bit. Every second we hesitate, another station falls apart to the sound of its own heat." Watching the arguments flicker across Nadir's relay screen, Rios felt the old, familiar ache of a species pulling in different directions out of reflex. Some wanted to burn every last engine in a wall of salvage silence and hide behind it forever. Others said better to die loud than live as ghosts. Vorin appeared beside her, hair more disordered than before. "I didn't build this to become doctrine," he said. "It was a tool for buying time, not a blueprint for the future." "Tools don't care how they're used," Rios replied. "People do, or they're supposed to." On one side channel, a coalition of frontier colonies signaled their intent to build their own engines, with or without Accord sanction. On another, a loose network of artists, philosophers, and low-bandwidth rebels circulated a countermessage. "We are more than our fear of noise." Rios watched both currents collide and realized the ultimatum was no longer only silence or extinction. A third option had emerged, jagged and unclear. Find a way to fight that didn't require becoming the very void the Resonance demanded. To do that, they would have to stop trying to outshout the enemy. They would have to learn how to be heard differently. Beneath the fear, Aya sensed a thread no model could chart. It lived in unfinished messages and in the tap of hands on bulkheads when speech was risky. Humanity had spent ages filling dark with sound. Now, they had to choose which noise was worth turning into a weapon. Section 7. Listening to the enemy. If you wanted to kill a song, Aya Rios thought you had to know its shape. The same applied to an enemy whose body and weapons were made of sound without air. To fight the Resonants, they had to listen to them longer than fear allowed. Nadir's war room became less a command center and more a studio. Banks of processors focused not on targeting solutions, but on dissecting waveforms from every recorded attack. Pulses slowed down a millionfold crawled across the main display, turned into visible hills and valleys of force. What had been a single unbearable tone became a landscape of intricate structure. "Look here," said the chief analyst, tracing a finger along one ridge. "This spike only appears after our own transmissions cross a certain threshold. It's a response, not an opening move." Vorin overlaid human signal logs on top. Bursts of mesh traffic, emergency broadcasts, panic chatter from habitats. Each time humanity raised its voice in fear, the Resonants wrapped new harmonics around it, using their patterns as scaffolding. "They're not just broadcasting at us," Aya said slowly. "They're keying off our noise, riding it, shaping it. Predators that evolved next to something loud," Vorin murmured. "They listen for structure, then push it until it breaks what they need broken." Aya watched sequences where partial silence had forced the Resonants to shift band, hunting for fresh footholds. Total quiet had disoriented them for a moment, but at costs no one wanted to pay. Between those two extremes, deafening vulnerability and dead stillness, there had to be room for strategy. "What if the problem isn't that we're speaking," she said, "but how?" The room quieted further again. "Explain," the analyst said. "We communicate in steady patterns," Aya went on. "Regular pulses, predictable modulation. Our language, our code, even our panic follows rhythm. That makes it legible, exploitable. But what if we change the rhythm faster than they can adapt? What if we turn our signals into something that's part message, part trap? Voron's eyes narrowed. You mean design a new protocol? Not just a protocol, Aya said. A way of speaking built around silence as much as sound. Gaps that mean something. Irregular pulses. Patterns that look like noise until you know the key. The AI chimes softly. Preliminary models suggest such a system could reduce resonant coupling efficiency by over 60%. However, it would be difficult for unaugmented human minds to use. I almost smiled. Good. If it's hard for us, it'll hurt them more. Give me linguists, composers, cryptographers, anyone who's ever thought too much about patterns. If this war is about communication, then we make communication the battlefield. For the first time since the signals broke, the silence around them felt less like surrender and more like potential. A canvas, waiting to be written on in a new kind of ink. Section 8. Designing a new voice. It began with a metronome and the admission that human speech was, in many ways, lazy. We liked rhythm that repeated, beats we could dance to, codes that computers could parse without strain. All of it made the resonance work easier. Regularity was a ladder. They climbed it every time we opened our mouths. Aya Rios watched a strange gathering assemble in Nadir's largest briefing sphere. Signal engineers floated alongside linguists, neural interface designers, a composer whose work had once synchronized the lights of a ring city, and a handful of cryptographers who seemed personally offended by the idea of an enemy reading anything they did not want read. This won't be pretty, Aya said by way of welcome. We're here to design a way of talking that hurts to use. If it doesn't give us headaches, it won't give them any either. The composer, a gray-haired woman with calloused fingers, tapped a portable pad. You want asymmetry, she said. Irregular time signatures. Silence as part of the score. Notes that never quite resolve where the ear expects. Doable. Ugly. Powerful. A linguist added, we can embed meaning in pause, length, and sequence. Treat gaps as phonemes. It will feel unnatural at first. Unnatural is fine, Aya replied. Extinct is not. They worked in shifts, sleeping in brief snatches, feeding designs into Nadir's AI for stress testing. Pulse trains flickered across the display. Bursts of signal separated by strange, uneven silences. To untrained analysis, they looked like interference. Beneath that chaos lay structure, a new syntax built as much from absence as presence. In parallel, Voron and his team reworked the quiet engine's control field. Instead of one suffocating bubble, they tuned it to carve narrow corridors of enforced stillness through space. Lanes where conventional ways would die, but this new pulse-silent speech could still skate along the edges, using the engine's boundaries as punctuation. Think of it as talking in the spaces between heartbeats, the linguist said during one exhausted session. Aya tried the first live trial herself. A simple sentence, translated into the new protocol, became a series of clipped tones and measured gaps transmitted to a test receiver behind a shielded bulkhead. Speaking, it felt like walking downhill with one leg longer than the other. Wrong. Demanding. Focus bled away with every pause she had to hold exactly. The decoded message on the other end, however, was clear. The AI overlaid a simulated resonant response model. Their harmonics reached for the pattern, failed to lock, fragmented, and dissolved. Aya wiped sweat from her brow. Hard to speak, she said. Good. If it costs us effort, it will cost them stability. They named it Pulse Silence Can't. It was not meant to replace normal language. It was a weapon, a shield, and a promise that humanity would rather rewrite its own voice than give it up entirely. Section 9. The Corridor of Stillness. The quiet engine had always felt like a threat pointed inward. Now, strapped to the spine of TSV Nadir and mirrored on half a dozen other ships, it became something else. A scalpel aimed at the heart of Storm. The resonant cluster ahead was the densest they had ever seen. On the wave field display, it looked like a knotted crown of standing waves, its harmonics flaring brighter with each passing hour as it prepared to roll inward and wash over the inner worlds. If it crossed Mars' orbit intact, every habitat in the system would be one bad note away from collapse. Aya Rios floated in the command cradle, pulse silence relay strapped to her wrist, throat patch warm against her skin. Around her, the bridge crew worked in near stillness. Spoken words were reserved for emergencies. Orders traveled as coded taps, glances, and the new jagged rhythm of the cant whispered on narrow beams. Fleet reports engines in position, the comms chief said quietly. Corridor parameters uploaded. Voron's hollow flickered into place beside the main display. Remember, he said, you're not making a wall. You're carving lanes. Too much field, and you erase yourselves along with them. Understood, Aya replied. All ships, prepare to fire on my mark. We cut through on a single breath. The resonant crown pulsed, sensing their approach. Harmonics tested the edges of the fleet, tasting hull vibrations and reactor hum. Nadir's hull sang back in carefully randomized jitter, giving the enemy nothing clean to grab. 3, 2, 1. The quiet engines ignited. Space along the fleet's vector folded into bands of enforced stillness. To outside sensors, it looked as if someone had drawn a dark corridor straight through the wave field, a path where background noise fell to near zero. At the corridor's boundaries, resonant structures writhed. Portions of their standing waves collapsed as they tried to follow their own harmonics into regions that would not support them. Inside the lane, Nadir's systems flickered but held. Whole silence can't rode on the knife edge between quiet and activity, encoding orders in bursts and absences that slipped along the corridor like cautious footsteps. We're in, the helm reported, maintaining field overlap. Any wider and we lose comms. Any narrower and we brush their edges. The fleet advanced, not by speed but by nerve. One misaligned engine, one ship drifting out of lane, and they would either fall mute forever or sing themselves apart. Ahead, the core of the cluster loomed, a vast nexus of interwoven harmonics, tall as a planet on the display, radiating patterns that made Aya's teeth ache just to look at. That, she whispered, is their heart. And for the first time, humanity had a path that led straight to it. Around it, lesser waveforms orbited like attendants, feeding and being fed, a choir of predators circling their own cathedral of sound. Section 10. Communication as a weapon. The closer they came to the resonant nexus, the less it felt like approaching an object, and the more it felt like stepping into an argument. Every meter of space seethed with conflicting pulls. Hull plates ticked and creaked as micro-vibrations tried to synchronize with external patterns and were slapped back down by the quiet Engine's disciplined stillness. Field integrity? Aya Rios asked. Within safe margins, Voron replied over the narrow band, can't link. His words arrived as clipped bursts and measured gaps, decoded by implants into uneasy clarity. But they're pushing. The Nexus is testing the corridor walls. On the wave field display, the core structure towered over their tiny lane, a braided column of harmonics spinning around its own axis. Branches of resonance arced out toward them, only to shear off where they met in forced quiet. Each failed contact sent shutters down the corridor as the quiet engines absorbed and canceled more energy than they had ever been asked to take. They're trying to retune us, the chief analyst said, like a musician forcing an instrument back into key. We are not their instrument, Aya answered. Time to play our song. She signaled the fleet. Banks of transmitters came online, not in the old, vulnerable bands, but in the jagged pulse-silent structures the team had built. A coordinated pattern unfolded, then another, each one a strand in a larger tapestry. It was not language in any human sense. It was something deeper and stranger, a story told in timing and absence. The message encoded only a few concepts, but they were chosen with care. Self, boundary, refusal, continuity, the idea that a pattern could persist without being eaten, that it had the right to say no. The resonant nexus reacted. Harmonics surged, rising to meet the intrusion. But the new signal did not offer the clean ladders their predatory responses expected. Every attempt to couple produced interference, not reinforcement. Feedback loops blossomed within the nexus, its own structure fighting itself as parts of it interpreted the pattern as food, others as threat, and others as nothing at all. Internal coherence dropping, the analyst reported. They're oscillating between states and tearing their own standing waves apart. Keep transmitting, Aya said. Her throat burned from the effort of holding the cant's unnatural rhythm, but she didn't dare hand it off. Leadership was also a signal. Remind them we are not prey. We are another voice. In the lane around Nadir, the quiet engines adjusted, their fields flexing to contain the growing chaos. The nexus convulsed, bands of resonance snapping and recoiling like broken strings. For the first time, the enemy's song sounded unsure of itself. And in that uncertainty, humanity found room to speak. Across the fleet, crews whispered the cant through dry throats, feeling each pause like a weight. They were frightened, still fighting the urge to scream into open channels. Yet they held the rhythm together, not perfect, but enough that their uneven beat became something new in the dark, a human answer the resonance had never prepared to hear. Section 11. Choosing the level of silence. The nexus was unraveling, but victory was not a binary switch. It came as a spectrum of choices, each with its own flavor of loss. Collapse probability at 87%, the analyst reported. If we maintain current output, the resonant core will destabilize and dissipate over several hours. Several hours we don't have, came a terse voice from the Accord channel. Hi, Marshal Gorn again. We should fire the main quiet engine now. In this, remove every trace of them from our sky. On a secondary display, the schematics of the system-scale engine glowed. It was the original, unrestrained design. A field big enough to blanket the inner worlds in perfect non-resonance. No more harmonics, no more music, no more interference patterns complex enough to carry anything like thought. Voron's hollow flickered, haloed with static from the strain on their corridor. If we trigger that at full strength, he said, we don't just erase the resonance. We risk turning half the system into a cognitive dead zone. Ships, habitats, people, anything inside becomes less than it was. Goran cut in. Temporary sacrifice. Survival demands decisiveness. Aya felt the eyes of her bridge crew on her. They knew as well as she did that command was also communication. Whatever she chose would become precedent, a signal to future generations about what humanity valued when pressed to the edge. Hi, Marshal, she said, forcing steadiness into her voice and into the cant that carried it. If we win by making ourselves quiet enough to please them, then we have already obeyed their ultimatum. That is not survival. That is compliance. Static hissed between beats. The Nexus screamed soundlessly on the display as its internal harmonics fought. We have another option, Aya continued. We pulse the main engine, not a blanket, but precise cuts. We use it like a scalpel, not a guillotine. We trap the remaining resonant structures in pockets of enforced stillness, isolate them, and let the rest of the system keep its voice. Risky Voron said, Mistime the pulses, and we either free them or wound ourselves. Every choice here is risk, Aya replied. The question is whether we're willing to risk being human. Silence followed, heavy and expectant. Then Counselor Sanaa's voice came through, ragged but firm. Belt supports the pulsed option. We will not survive as mute rocks. If we're going to live, we live loud enough to know we're still ourselves. One by one, other votes joined. Mars, Luna, frontier stations that had lost friends to both Resonants and the engine test. The tally tipped, not overwhelmingly, but enough. Goran exhaled a harsh sound. Very well, Commander Rios. The main engine is yours. Do not make us regret this. For that to happen, she said, eyes on the fracturing nexus, we'd have to be around to regret anything at all. She cut the Accord channel and looked to her crew, the tired faces that had followed her into a corridor carved from nothing. We're not just firing a device, Aya said. We're choosing whether the future deserves a voice. Around Nadir, hands settled on controls ready. Section 12, after the noise. When the firing sequence began, the system held its breath. Across domes, tunnels, and orbital towers, people watched status feeds and blank sky, knowing only that somewhere beyond Mars a decision was being made about their future. On TSV Nadir, Aya Rios sat in the command cradle, harness locked, eyes on the wave field display. The resonant nexus writhed there, a broken crown of harmonics, gnawing at the narrow corridor her fleet had cut. The main engine is ready, Vorin said over the can, his voice arriving as jerks of meaning. 3 pulses before we melt the coils. Then 3 is what we use, Aya replied. First pulse on my mark. Far sunward, at a mesh node wired into every quiet engine, the main unit waited. It was no longer a proposal to smother the system. Aya and Vorin had redesigned it into a scalpel. Mark, she said, in a precise lattice around the nexus, oscillation vanished. Outer bands froze mid-surge, and when the field eased, did not restart. Without change, they were no longer cells, just dead shells of stress pinned in space. Outer structures gone, the analyst reported. Core still coherent. Second pulse, Aya ordered. The next cut sliced through internal channels, severing paths the core used to drive force outward. Within Nadir's corridor, pulse silence orders slid along the edge of safety. Outside, the nexus buckled as its own harmonics collided and erased each other. Coherence dropping fast, Vorin said. We're down to scattered knots. Enough, Aya knew, to grow back if left alone. She watched the remaining hotspots twitch on the display, small and stubborn. Echoes of an invader that had assumed every voice was either food or raw material. Third pulse, she said, not to erase us, to set a boundary. The last activation came as a softer net. Small wells of enforced quiet bloomed around each knot, locking them apart. On charts, they appeared as dark beads beyond Neptune, places where no wave would travel far again, quarantined for a way of being that would not be allowed to feed on others. The engine wound down. The corridor relaxed. Background noise returned to honest levels, a low, living murmur. Across the system, restrictions eased. Mesh nodes tested new protocols built to hide meaning inside irregular beats and guarded silences. Music channels flickered on at low power. Somewhere on Luna, someone shouted purely for the joy of hearing an echo. In a Martian bar, a guitar string rang sharp and alive, and nobody flinched. On Nadir's observation deck, Aya stood at the rail, watching ordinary stars. They were what they had always been, distant lights over a species that now understood how loudly it lived. Vorin joined her. We kept our voice, he said. We learned to change it instead of giving it up, Aya answered. That has to mean something. What now, he asked. Now we remember that everything we send into the dark is both invitation and challenge, she said. We teach that silence is powerful, but so is choosing when to break it. Far above the moon, in the deep black archives, an AI curator created a new record. Case file 034. The War Beyond Sound. Classification: hostile contact. Outcome: human victory. Note: enemy built on resonance defeated not by surrendering communication, but by altering it. Species accepted risk and pain rather than survive as imposed silence. The file slid into its shelf beside older scars and unclaimed futures. Beyond mapped space, other patterns drifted, listening without yet understanding. Humanity's new voice moved between the stars, rough, deliberate, and defiantly still there. Please do press that like button if you have enjoyed this story, and also please do subscribe and hit the bell icon to listen to more stories like this one. That would mean a real lot to me. Now go ahead and listen to your next story here.